Hello, I am Willow, a 30-year-old woman who has been married to Asher for 3 years. We don't have children yet. Our lives changed dramatically after the unexpected passing of Asher's father, Jesse, from a heart attack. At the time, we were living in a different state, and the news of his sudden death was a complete shock to us. During the funeral, Asher's uncle subtly suggested that Asher, as the youngest and only son, should return home to be closer to his family and help his mother cope. A few months later, Asher shared that he had arranged for a transfer to a closer office. He made this decision on his own and told me afterward, which upset me, as I felt that such an important decision should have been discussed between us first. When I expressed my frustration, Asher apologized and admitted that he had anticipated my objections. He knew about the tension in my relationship with his mother, Mary, and that the feeling was mutual. Before, when we lived farther away, our visits to Asher's parents were mostly reserved for extended holidays, mainly due to work commitments. Mary often complained about our infrequent visits, comparing us to Asher's sisters, Skylar and Diane, who lived nearby and visited more often. Despite the distance and travel costs, Asher always defended our position. Our relationship with Mary was always somewhat strained, but manageable. The biggest issue between us, however, was her focus on the fact that we hadn't had children yet. During one summer visit, she bluntly questioned me about it, even suggesting I couldn't bear children, comparing me to men. I ultimately decided to join Asher, reasoning that we wouldn't always be living together anyway. To my surprise, Mary seemed genuinely pleased with my decision. 3 weeks later, she invited me over for tea, and it was the first time I accepted such an invitation, though I was reluctant. When I arrived at their house, Mary and Skylar greeted me. "Willow, it's been so long, why haven't you visited since moving here?" Skylar asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. By then, I was already regretting coming. Mary added almost cheerfully, "I was so happy when you decided to move closer. But now it seems I was wrong. You don't like me, do you?" I almost wanted to confirm her suspicion, just to see her reaction, but I held back. "I don't dislike you. I've just been adjusting to the new environment and feeling unwell," I explained, which was partially true. I had been resting at home due to fatigue, and Asher hadn't mentioned the visit to me. Why was I here today? Just to endure their harsh remarks. Mary quickly accused me of disliking her, but wasn't it the other way around? How were we supposed to get along under these circumstances? Skylar sharply interjected, "How can you speak to your mother-in-law like that? Apologize to her, say you are sorry." I expected Mary to respond with anger, but her reply surprised me. "You are right, I have been mean. I am sorry, Willow. I also apologize for my comments about children. I was being intrusive. I had braced myself for a lecture, expecting some hidden criticism, but there was none. Even Skylar looked taken aback. All I wanted was a grandchild," Mary confessed. She explained that Skylar's husband was infertile, and Diane was having fertility issues, so she had placed all her hopes on Asher and me. Even though Asher and I had discussed having children, we were still in the process of considering it. "So I ask for some patience, please. Just give us some time," I said, bowing my head slightly. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a sense of duty. "I am sorry," I added. "But do visit us sometimes." After that, Mary and Skylar resumed watching television and sipping their tea as if the earlier tension had never happened. "I like this announcer," Mary remarked about her favorite local television personality. "She's so energetic and bright." Watching them in the television, I felt a pang of regret. Maybe if I had been more outgoing, things could have been different with Mary and her family. It was a fleeting, somewhat naive thought. I was relieved to have shared my feelings earlier that day, hoping it might lead to better relations. Yet my optimism was short-lived. That evening, Asher stormed in, visibly upset. "I heard from Mom that you said you have no intention of getting along." She was crying, "Willow, what did you say to her?" I was stunned by his reaction. Just earlier, he had left with a smile, and now he seemed to be accusing me of something entirely different. "Asher, to hear has been a misunderstanding." I tried to clarify. I told her it's difficult for me to be friends, given our current relationship. How does that translate to me not wanting to get along? I was scared now. Asher seemed to fully believe Mary's twisted version of the story. His earlier smile now appeared deceptive, and I didn't know how to navigate this. I tried to explain further, but he wasn't convinced. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Skylar. "After all the effort of moving here, Weren't you prepared to make it work? If you are here with us, you need to be a bit more patient. Asher glanced at me as if echoing Skylar's words. I moved here because I cared about being with him, not just to appease Mary and Skylar. Facing Asher, I held his gaze and said, "It's clear that Mary and the others might never approve of me. Maybe you should consider someone she likes more." The word divorce slipped out before I could catch it, and for the first time, Asher looked genuinely alarmed. "Wait, hold on, how did we jump to divorce? I just want you to get along better with my family," he said, bewildered by the turn of the conversation. He couldn't grasp that his family might never accept me, which left me equally baffled. However, Asher seemed determined to resolve the misunderstanding. The next day, he returned late from work and relayed his conversation with his mother. She admitted there was a misunderstanding and apologized. "What a fuss," he said. He also mentioned that Mary's birthday was approaching and suggested, "How about we celebrate her birthday at a fancy restaurant?" The sudden shift from turmoil to talks of celebration left me perplexed, but it was clear Asher was making an effort to mend fences, even if the path seemed incredibly rocky. Asher suggested that if we presented the birthday dinner as my idea, perhaps it could positively shift his mother's perception of me. Though I was skeptical of Mary's ability to appreciate such gestures sincerely, given her complex personality, I agreed to make the restaurant reservation. I invited Skylar and the others, specifying a table for 8. Asher consented. But as the date drew nearer, a sense of unease grew within me. Asher had been distant lately, giving only curt, indifferent responses to my attempts at conversation, which made me feel increasingly isolated. On the day of the dinner, we arrived at the restaurant to find Mary, Skylar, and their spouses already gathered. The host showed Asher and me to our table, casting a questioning glance that only added to my discomfort. "Happy birthday, Mary," I greeted her cheerfully, trying to bridge the gap. However, Mary didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, she turned to the others, thanking them for joining her celebration. It felt like a deliberate snub. Skylar appeared puzzled. "I thought this was supposed to be a family gathering," she remarked, glancing at me with a brief, confused expression. Diane, sensing the tension, looked over with concern. It was then that I realized I was being deliberately excluded. Determined not to let it spoil my evening, I decided to keep to myself and leave early. Just as I was preparing to carry out my plan, a staff member approached our table with an awkward demeanor. "I am sorry, but the reservation was made for 7 p.m. today," he informed us. Confused, I replied, "I clearly reserved for 8. Could there have been a mistake?" "No, it should definitely be for 8, I insisted, recalling the conversation I had had when making the reservation. "Oh, yes, but about a week ago, we received a call from a gentleman asking to change it to 7, the worker explained. Stunned, I turned to Asher seeking an explanation. His response left me speechless. "Yes, please, service for 7. "Everyone's here now," he said flatly, confirming the change himself. In that moment, I felt a mix of betrayal and disbelief. Asher's actions made it clear that, despite his words, his commitment to resolving family tensions was superficial at best. The realization that he had manipulated the situation behind my back was deeply unsettling, overshadowing what was supposed to be a joyful family occasion. I stood frozen as Asher turned toward me with a sharp, accusatory look. "I heard from Mom that you've been undermining our family, saying I don't earn enough and that I am insensitive. You had a lot to say, huh?" It turned out that a week earlier, when Asher had spoken to Mary about the dinner reservation, she had filled his head with all kinds of falsehoods. Blinded by anger and trusting her, he had called the restaurant, pretending to be me, and reduced the reservation from 8 to 7. The staff, recognizing the family name, didn't question the change. I couldn't believe how easily Asher had been misled in such a short time. With this realization, I began to question why I was even there. When I confronted Asher, demanding he apologize to everyone present and reconsider his actions, he did something unexpected. He insisted that I apologize to my in-laws and then go home alone to think things over. Naturally, I refused. I couldn't admit to things I hadn't said. Nor could I accept a husband who would take his mother's word over mine. Tears of frustration welled in my eyes. Why had I even come here? Seeing my distress, Asher began to panic, but it was too late. Mary, watching the scene unfold, wore a smug smile, clearly pleased that her manipulative efforts were succeeding. I looked coldly at Asher and said, "Next time, marry a younger, more obedient daughter-in-law." Maybe then you'll have children and be happier. Mary quickly shot back, her words sharp and cutting. Willow, why don't you go back to your own parents' house? A daughter-in-law is always an outsider. I can't see you as part of this family. You are not charming at all, so please leave quickly. Her words stung, but they also steeled my resolve. I'd leave even if you didn't tell me to, I retorted. I'd like to see someone who could actually get along with someone as twisted as you. With that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. Asher sat in silence, his head buried in his hands. Just as I reached the exit, I heard someone call my name. It was Diane and her husband. Willow, wait, Diane said, clearly distressed. I can't take it anymore. Mom and Skylar haven't changed at all. I knew the gossip about you wasn't true. Diane's acknowledgement of the truth amidst all the chaos brought me a small sense of comfort, as she continued, showing that she was ready to distance herself from the toxicity. This moment of support, though small and coming amidst overwhelming emotion, offered a glimmer of hope that there might be someone in the family who understood me. As I stood there, digesting Diane's words, my phone rang, flashing Mary's name. Ugh, what now? But before I could answer, Asher's name replaced hers on the display. Muttering under my breath, I watched Diane and her husband exchange knowing looks. Willow, you might want to go back to the restaurant. You might see something interesting, Diane suggested, her eyes hinting at a twist I hadn't anticipated. They left, looking oddly pleased with themselves. I hesitated, but curiosity won over my desire to distance myself from the drama. When I finally answered Asher's call, his voice was frantic, tinged with panic. Willow, I am sorry. I didn't realize it was all a lie. I'll send the divorce papers later, he blurted out, but then quickly pleaded. Wait, can't you come back, please? It's a lifetime request. His almost childish plea almost made me laugh, but remembering Diane's cryptic hint, I decided to return to the restaurant. Upon arriving, I was met by an unexpected scene. A crowd was gathered around Asher's table, where a local television announcer, Mary's favorite, was speaking into a microphone. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Mary was stumbling over her words, clearly struggling to explain herself. No, that's not it, It's a misunderstanding, she stammered. Asher and Skylar looked both awkward and uneasy, clearly not prepared for this turn of events. The announcer, microphone in hand, pressed Mary further. You loudly declared in the restaurant that Willow is an outsider and should leave. What did you mean by that? Please explain in detail. Meanwhile, Diane's husband, along with others who had been offended by the earlier events, had quietly left the scene. It all seemed surreal as I stood there, somewhat dumbfounded. I pieced together that this had turned into a public spectacle, possibly being broadcasted. I realized then that I had forgotten to confirm the reservation details amidst the initial chaos. As I tried to make sense of the situation, a staff member approached, noting my confusion. It's been quite a day, hasn't it? They remarked, explaining that a television recording had been scheduled at the restaurant that very day, which explained the unexpected media presence. The entire ordeal had unexpectedly played out on live television, casting the family drama in a stark, unfiltered light for all to see. As I processed the unfolding events, I couldn't help but feel a mix of vindication and disbelief at the bizarre turn my evening had taken. Although the dining area offered some privacy, conversations could still be easily overheard. Just after I stepped out, a famous television announcer approached Mary with a beaming smile, ready to conduct an interview. Mary, an avid fan, was visibly excited. An interview? Absolutely, she exclaimed enthusiastically. The topic was daughter-in-law and mother-in-law relationships. We heard there was a heated argument earlier, and the daughter-in-law left in tears. Can you tell us what happened? The announcer asked, putting Mary on the spot. Taken aback by the direct question, Mary and Skylar's faces turned pale, clearly at a loss for words. They could not openly address the embarrassing truth about how they had manipulated the situation to drive a wedge between their son and his wife. From a distance, Asher spotted me and made a desperate plea. Willow, please, I can't let this embarrassment be exposed. It was all just a misunderstanding, he begged, looking utterly defeated. By that point, all of my feelings for him had vanished. Mary attempted to smooth things over with an odd smile. Oh, we always call each other Willow, she said, waving me over as I approached. The microphone was directed at me. You say you call each other Willow, but how does the daughter-in-law feel about her mother-in-law? The announcer asked. I've never been called that, I responded calmly, but I have been called unpatriotic multiple times because we don't have children. The truth is, Asher and I simply weren't ready or confident enough to start a family. We haven't even tried for over 2 years. That was always something I was told could lead to divorce, I continued, explaining. I also shared how Asher had initially supported me when I fell ill and had to leave from work. I appreciated his kindness and followed him here, hoping that a change of environment might help, but this is what it had come to. By then, I had no more tears left, only detachment. Seeing Mary and Skylar looking embarrassed and pitiful brought me a small measure of satisfaction. As I stood there, preparing for the possibility of this being broadcast nationwide, I couldn't help but reflect on the surreal events of the day. Seeing Mary's distressed expression as I mentioned the broadcast made me smile. Well, since the daughter-in-law is considered an outsider, I guess I should leave. Goodbye, I said, savoring the moment as I left the restaurant, ignoring the shouts and commotion that followed. The day had been long and fraught with emotion, but in that final moment, I felt a profound sense of release. Walking away from the chaos, I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Although Mary and her family managed to prevent the broadcast of the footage, the incident had already created quite a stir locally. It quickly became a hot topic among our relatives and acquaintances, fueling gossip and speculation. Afterward, I returned to my room, packed my belongings, and moved back to my parents' house. I sent the divorce papers to Asher, but his response was delayed, prompting me to consider seeking legal counsel. To my surprise, Asher soon appeared at my parents' door. My father, Peter, who is typically calm and composed, took charge of the situation with authority. Asher offered a heartfelt apology, expressing his intention to cut ties with his family and promising to trust only in me going forward. But by then, his promises felt empty too little, too late. Peter, visibly upset by the years of distress Asher had caused me, didn't hold back. Why didn't you realize this sooner? What have you done to Willow all these years? Just sign the divorce papers and leave, he said sternly. With regret in his eyes, Asher handed over the divorce papers, his handwriting shaky and almost illegible. Despite the difficulty, the papers were processed successfully. It later emerged that Skylar had been the real cause of her infertility, something she had wrongly attributed to her husband. Now, on the brink of her own divorce, she no longer visited her in-laws. Asher moved back to live with his mother, Mary, in their small hometown. They likely faced lingering, uncomfortable rumors, but that chapter of my life had come to a close. In the months that followed, my life took a much more positive turn. I reconnected with a classmate from my hometown, and we married. Our relationship was filled with joy, and we soon welcomed a child. Now, we have a 2-year-old daughter, and I am expecting our second. My new mother-in-law is everything that Mary was not: angelic, supportive, and kind. Life, as unpredictable as it is, has led me to a fulfilling and happy existence, surrounded by love and support that I once thought was beyond my reach.